Hello guys. It's been a while since I made videos, as you may have noticed. I just haven't been feeling it. Mainly my time has been spent over on Twitch, streaming and interacting with the chat there. But I decided, let's do something to see if I can get back on the horse. So I decided I'm gonna do some bedtime stories, because people have told me ever since the start that I have a very soothing voice, and well, let's see if I can put people to sleep with this. So, find yourself a comfortable position. Put the phone or the tablet to your side and just listen. Tonight's stories will be from the Brother Grimm's fairy tales. Chapter 1: The Frog King, or Iron Henry. Once upon a time, there was a princess who went out into the forest and sat down at the edge of a cool well. She had a golden ball that was her favorite plaything. She threw it high and caught it in the air and was delighted by all of this. One time the ball flew up very high, and she stretched out her hand and bent her fingers to catch it again. The ball hit the ground near her and rolled until it fell into the water. The princess was horrified, and when she went to look for the ball, she found the well was so deep that she couldn't see the bottom. So she began to weep miserably and to lament, "Oh, if I only had my ball again, I'd give anything, my clothes, my jewel, my pearls, and anything else in the world to get my ball back." And she sat there grieving. A frog stuck its head out of the water and said, "Why are you weeping so miserably?" "Oh," she said, "you nasty frog, you can't help me. My golden ball has fallen into the water." "Well, I don't want your pearls or your jewels or your clothes," the frog responded. "But if you'll accept me as your companion and let me sit next to you and let me eat from your little golden plate and sleep in your little bed and promise to love and cherish me, I'll fetch your ball for you." The princess thought, what nonsense the simple-minded frog is blabbering. He's got to remain in his water. Perhaps he can get me my ball, so I'll say yes to him. And she said, "Yes, fair enough, but first fetch me the golden ball. I promise you everything." The frog dipped his head beneath the water and dove down. It didn't take long before he came back to the surface with the ball in his mouth. He threw it onto the ground, and when the princess caught sight of the ball again, she quickly ran over it, picked it up, and was so delighted to have the ball in her hands again that she thought of nothing else but to rush back home with it. The frog called after her, "Wait, princess, take me with you, the way you promised." But she didn't pay any attention to him. The next day the princess sat at the table and heard something coming up the marble steps. Splish, splash, splish, splash. Soon thereafter it knocked at the door and cried out, "Princess, youngest daughter, open up." She ran to the door and opened it, and there was the frog, whom she had forgotten. Horrified, she quickly slammed the door shut and sat down back at the table. But the king saw that her heart was thumping and said, "Why are you afraid?" "There's a nasty frog outside," she replied. "He retrieved my golden ball from the water, and I promised him that he could be my companion, but I never believed that he could get out of the water. Now he's standing outside in front of the door and wants to come inside." As she said this, there was a knock at the door, and the frog cried out, "Princess, youngest daughter, open up. Don't you remember what you said? Down by the well's cool water. Princess, youngest daughter, open up." The king said, "You must keep your promise, no matter what you said. Go and open the door for the frog." She obeyed, and the frog hopped inside and followed her at her heels until they came to her chair. When she sat down again, he cried out, lift me up to the chair beside you." The princess didn't want to do this, but the king ordered her to do it. When the frog was up on the table, he said, "Now, push your golden plate nearer me so we can eat together." The princess had to do this as well, and after he had eaten until he was full, he said, "Now I'm tired and want to sleep. Bring me upstairs to your little room. Get your little bed ready so we can lie down in it." The princess became terrified when she heard this, for she was afraid of the cold frog. She didn't dare touch him, and now he was to lie in her bed next to her. She began to weep and didn't want to comply with his wishes at all. But the king became angry and ordered her to do what she had promised, or she'd be held in disgrace. Nothing helped. She had to do what her father wanted, but she was bitterly angry in her heart. So she picked up the frog with 2 fingers, carried him upstairs into her room, and laid down in her bed. Instead of setting him down next to her, she threw him, crash, against the wall. "Now you'll leave me in peace, you nasty frog." But the frog didn't fall down dead. Instead, when he fell down on the bed, he became a handsome young prince. Well, now indeed he did become her dear companion. And she cherished him as she had promised, and in their delight they fell asleep together. The next morning a splendid coach arrived, drawn by 8 horses with feathers and glistening gold harnesses. The Princess Faithful Henry accompanied them. He had been so distracted when he had learned his master had turned into a frog that he had ordered 3 iron bands to be wrapped around his heart to keep bursting from grief. When the prince got into the coach with the princess, his faithful servant took his place at the back so they could return to the prince's realm. And after they had traveled some distance, the prince heard a loud creaking noise behind him. So he turned around and cried out, "Henry, the coach is breaking." "No, my lord, it's really nothing but the band around my heart, which nearly came apart. When you turned into a frog, your fortune fell. You were made to live in that dreadful well." 2 more times the prince heard the creaking noise and thought the coach was breaking, but the noise was only the sound of the bands springing from faithful Henry's heart, because his master had been released from the spell and was happy. Story number 2. The companionship of cat and mouse. A cat and mouse wanted to live together, so they set up a common household. They also prepared for winter and bought a little jar of fat. But since they did not know of a better and safer place to put it, they stuck it under the altar in the church, where it was supposed to stay until they needed it. Now it was not long before the cat felt a craving for fat and went to the mouse and said, "Listen, little mouse, my cousin has asked me to be godfather of his child. She gave birth to a baby boy, white with brown spots. I am to hold him at the christening. Would you mind letting me go out today and taking care of the house by yourself?" "No, no," answered the mouse. "Go there. When you get something good to eat, think of me. I sure would like a little drop of sweet red christening wine." But the cat went straight to the church and licked up the skin of the top of the fat. Then he strolled around the city and did not return home until the evening. "You must have enjoyed yourself very much," said the mouse. "What name did they give the child?" "Skin Off," the cat answered. "Skin Off? That's a strange name. I've never heard of it before." Soon thereafter, the cat felt another craving and went to the mouse and said, "I've been asked to be godfather once more. The child has a white ring around his body. I cannot refuse. You must do me a favor and look after the house." The mouse consented, and the cat went and ate up half of the jar of fat. He then returned home, and the mouse asked, "What name was the godchild given?" "Half Gone." "Half Gone? You don't say. I've never heard of such name. I'm sure it's not at the top of the list of proper baptismal names." Now the cat couldn't stop thinking about the jar of fat. "I've been asked to be godfather again for the 3rd time. This child's black and has white paws. Aside from that, there's not a white hair on his body. That only happens once every few years. You'll let me go, won't you?" "Skin off, half gone," the mouse said. "Those are really curious names. I'm beginning to wonder about them. Even so, go ahead." The mouse cleaned the house and put it in order, while the cat ate up the rest of the fat in the jar and came home stout and stuffed late that night. "What's the name of the third child?" "All gone." "All gone? Hey now, that's the most suspicious name of all," said the mouse. "All gone? What's that supposed to mean? I've never seen it in print." Upon saying that, the mouse shook her head and went to sleep. Nobody called upon the cat to become godfather for the fourth time. However, soon winter came, and there was nothing more to be found outside. So the mouse said to the cat, "Come, let's go to our supply that we stuck beneath the altar at the church." But when they arrived, the jar was completely empty. "Oh," said the mouse, "now I know what happened. It's as clear as day. You ate it all up when you went to serve as godfather. First the skin, then half, then—" "Shut up," yelled the cat. "One more word and I'll eat you up." All gone was already on the tip of the poor mouse's tongue. No sooner did he say it than the cat jumped on her and swallowed her in a gulp. Story number 3. The Virgin Mary's Child. A poor woodcutter and his wife lived at the edge of a large forest with their only child, a 3-year-old little girl. They were so poor that they could not afford daily meals anymore, and did not know how they would provide food for their daughter. One morning, the woodcutter, who was distressed by all of this, went into the forest to work. As he began chopping wood, a tall, beautiful woman suddenly appeared before him. She was wearing a crown of shining stars on her head, and she said to him, "I'm the Virgin Mary, mother of the Christ child. Since you are poor and needy, bring me your child. I will take her with me and be her mother and look after her." The woodcutter obeyed her. He fetched his child and gave her to the Virgin Mary, who took her up to heaven. Once there, everything went well for the girl. She ate only cake and drank only sweet milk. Her clothes were made of gold, and the little angels played with her. One day, about the time the girl had turned 14, the Virgin Mary had to go on a long journey. Before she went away, she summoned the girl and said, "Dear child, I'm trusting you with the keys to the 13 doors of the kingdom of heaven. You may open 12 of the doors and look at all the marvelous things inside. But I forbid you to open the 13th door that this little key unlocks." The maiden promised to obey her commands, and after the Virgin Mary departed, she opened a new room every day and looked into the rooms of the heavenly realm. In each one of them, there was an apostle in the dazzling light. Never in her life had she seen such splendor and glory. When she had finished opening the 12 doors, the forbidden door was the only one left. For a long time she resisted her curiosity, but finally she was overcome by it and opened the 13th door as well. And as the door sprang up, she saw the Holy Trinity sitting in fire and splendor. She then touched the flames a little bit with her finger, and the finger turned golden. Quickly she slammed the door shut. Her heart started pounding and wouldn't stop. A few days later, the Virgin Mary returned from her journey and asked the maiden to return the keys to her. When the girl handed her the bunch of keys, the Virgin looked into her eyes and said, "Didn't you also open the 13th door?" "No," she answered. Then the Virgin Mary put her hand on the maiden's heart and could feel it pounding and pounding. Now she knew the girl had disobeyed her and had opened the door. Once again she asked, "Are you sure that you didn't open the door?" "I'm sure," the maiden denied, doing it for the second time. When the Virgin Mary glanced at the finger that had become golden from touching the heavenly fire, she knew the maiden was guilty and said, "You've disobeyed me and lied. You are no longer worthy to stay in heaven." All at once the girl sank into deep sleep, and when she awoke, she was lying on the earth beneath a tall tree, surrounded by thick bushes, so that she was completely encircled. Her mouth was also locked so that she couldn't utter a word. Since the tree was hollow, she could sit inside during the rain and storm, and it's also where she slept. Roots and wild berries were her only food, and she went out looking for them as far as she could walk. In the autumn, she gathered roots and leaves and carried them to the hollow tree. When snow and ice came, she sat inside the tree. Before long, her clothes became tattered, and one piece after another fell off her body. So there she sat, completely covered in leaves. As soon as the sun began to shine again, she went out and sat in front of the tree. Her long hair covered her on all sides like a cloak. One day during springtime, she was sitting in front of the tree when someone forced his way through the bushes. It was the king, who had been hunting in the forest and had lost his way. And he was amazed to find such a beautiful maiden sitting alone in this desolate spot. So he asked her whether she would like to come with him to his castle. However, she could not answer. Instead, she merely nodded a little with her head. Then the king lifted her up onto his horse and brought her to the castle. Soon he became fond of her and made her his wife. After a year had passed, the queen gave birth to a beautiful son. During the night, however, the Virgin Mary appeared before her and said, "If you'll tell me the truth and say that you unlocked the forbidden door, I will give you back the power of speech, without which you cannot really enjoy life. If you're stubborn and won't confess, I'll take your baby away." But the queen remained stubborn and denied that she had opened the forbidden door. So the Virgin Mary took the little child and disappeared with him. The next morning, the baby was no longer there. A rumor began circulating among the people that the queen was an ogress and had eaten her own child. Then another year passed. The queen gave birth to another son. Once more, the Virgin Mary appeared before her and asked her to tell the truth. Otherwise, she would lose her second child. But the queen persisted in denying that she had opened the forbidden door. So the Virgin Mary took the child away with her. Next morning, when this baby also went missing, the king's counselors said openly that the queen was an ogress, and they demanded that she be executed for her godless deeds. However, the king ordered them to keep quiet and refused to believe them because he loved his wife so much. In the third year, the queen gave birth to a princess, and the Virgin Mary appeared before her once more and took her to heaven, where she showed her two oldest children were playing with a globe of the earth. Thereupon the Virgin Mary asked the queen once more to confess her mistake and stop lying. However, the queen wouldn't budge and continued to stand on her story. So the Virgin Mary left her and took away her third child too. Now the king could not restrain his counselors any longer, who continued to claim that the queen was an ogress. They were certain, and since she couldn't speak, she couldn't defend herself. Consequently, she was commended to die at the stake. As she stood tied to the stake, the fire began to burn all around her. Her heart was moved, and she thought to herself, "Oh, before I die, I'd like to confess to the Virgin Mary that I opened the forbidden door in heaven. I have been so wicked by denying all this time." And just as she was thinking all this to herself, heaven opened up right then and there, and the Virgin Mary descended with two little sons on either side and the daughter in her arms. The fire was extinguished by itself, and Virgin Mary stepped forward to the queen and said, "Since you want to speak the truth, your guilt is forgiven." And then she handed the queen her children and opened her mouth so that she could speak from then on, and bestowed happiness on her for the rest of her life. Story number 4. Good bowling and card playing. Once upon a time, there was a king who had the most beautiful daughter in the world. One day he announced, "Whoever can keep watch in my old castle for 3 nights can have the princess for his bride." Now there was a young man from a poor family who thought to himself, why not risk my life? I've got nothing to lose and a lot to win. What's there to think about? So he appeared before the king and offered to keep watch in the castle for 3 nights. You may request 3 things to take with you into the castle, but they have to be lifeless objects, the king said. Well, I'd like to take a carpenter's bench with a knife, a leaf, and fire. All of these things were carried into the castle for him. When it turned dark, he himself went inside. At first things were quiet. He built a little fire, placed a carpenter's bench with a knife next to it, and sat down at the lathe. Towards midnight, however, a rumbling could be heard, first softly, then more loudly. Biff, buff, hey, hola ho. It became more dreadful, and then it was finally quiet. Finally, a leg came down the chimney and stood right before him. Hey there, the young man cried out. How about some more? 1 is too little. The noise began once again. Another leg fell down the chimney, and then another, until there were 9. That's enough now. I've got enough for bowling. But there were no balls. Out with them. There was a tremendous uproar, and 2 skulls fell down the chimney. He put them in the lathe and turned them until they were smooth. Now they'll roll much better. Then he did the same things with the leg and set them up as bowling pins. Hey, now I can have some fun. Suddenly 2 large black cats appeared and strode around the fire. Meow, meow, they screeched. We're freezing, we're freezing. You fools! What are you screaming about? Sit down by the fire and warm yourselves. After the cats had warmed themselves, they said, Good fellow, we want to play a round of cards. All right, he replied, but show me your paws. You got such long claws that I got to give them a good clipping before we begin. Upon saying this, he grabbed them by the scuffs of their necks and lifted them to the carpenter's bench. He then fastened them to the vise and beat them to death. Afterwards, he carried them outside and threw them into a pond that lay across from the castle. Just as he returned to the castle and wanted to settle down and warm himself by the fire, many black cats and dogs came out of every nook and cranny, more and more, so he couldn't hide himself. They screamed and stomped on the fire and kicked it about, so the fire went out. So he grabbed his carving knife and yelled, Get out of here, you riffraff! And he began swinging his knife. Most of the cats and dogs ran away, the others were killed. He carried them out and threw them into the pond. Then he went back inside to the fire and blew the sparks so that the fire began again, and he could warm himself. After he had warmed himself, he tried to lay down on the large bed that stood in the corner. Just as he wanted to fall asleep, the bed began to stir and race around the entire castle. That's fine by me, just keep it up. So the bed drove around as though 6 horses were pulling it over stairs and landings. Bing, bang. It turned upside down from the top to bottom, and he was beneath it. So he flung the blankets and pillow into the air and jumped off. Anyone who wants a ride can have one. Then he laid down next to the fire until dawn. In the morning, the king arrived, and when he saw the young man lying asleep, he thought he was dead and said, What a shame. But when the young man heard these words, he awoke, and soon as he saw the king, he stood up. Then the king asked him how things had gone during the night. Quite well. 1 night's gone smoothly, the other 2 will go by as well. Indeed, the other nights were just like the first, but he already knew what to do, and so the 4th day he was rewarded with the king's beautiful daughter. Story number 5. The Wolf and the 7 Kids. A goat had 7 young kids, whom she loved very much and carefully protected from the wolf. One day, when she had to go fetch some food, she called them all together and said, Dear children, I must go out and find some food, so be on your guard against the wolf and don't let him inside. Pay close attention because he often disguises himself, but you can recognize him right away by his gruff voice and his black paws. Protect yourselves. If he gets into the house, he'll eat you all up. Upon saying this, the goat went her way, and it was not long before the wolf arrived at the door and called out, "Open up, dear children. I'm your mother, and I brought you some beautiful things." But the 7 kids said, "You're not our mother. She has a lovely soft voice, and yours is gruff. You're the wolf. We're not going to open the door." The wolf went to a shopkeeper and bought a piece of chalk, which he ate, and it made his voice soft. He then returned to the house door of the 7 kids and called out with a soft voice, "Dear children, let me in. I am your mother. I brought some things for each of you." But the wolf had put his paws on the windowsill, and when the children saw it, they said, "You're not our mother. She doesn't have black paws like you. You're the wolf. We're not going to open the door for you." So the wolf ran to the baker and said, "Baker, put some dough on my paws." After that was done, the wolf went to the miller and said, "Sprinkle some white flowers on my paws." The miller said, "No. If you don't do it, I'll eat you up." So the miller had to do it. Now the wolf once again went to the house door of the 7 kids and said, "Children, let me in. I'm your mother. I brought something for each of you." The 7 kids wanted to see her paws, and when they saw that they were snow white and heard the wolf speak so softly, they thought he was their mother, and they opened the door. Once the wolf entered, however, they recognized him quickly hid themselves the best they could. The first kid slid under the table, the second hid in the bed, the third in the oven, the fourth in the kitchen, the fifth in the cupboard, the sixth under the large washbin, and the 7th in the clock case. However, the wolf found them all and swallowed them, except the youngest in the clock, who remained alive. When the wolf had satisfied his craving, he went off. Shortly thereafter, the mother goat came home, and oh, what a terrible sight! The wolf had been there and devoured her dear children. She thought they were all dead, but then the youngest jumped out of the clock and told her everything that happened. In the meantime, the wolf, who was stuffed, had gone to a green meadow, where he had lain himself down in the sun and fallen into a deep sleep. The old goat thought she might still be able to save her children. Therefore she said to her youngest kid, "Take the scissors, needle and thread, and follow me." After she left the house, she found the wolf lying on the ground in the meadow, snoring. "That's a nasty wolf," she said, and inspected him from all sides. "There he is, after eating my 6 children for supper. Give me the scissors. Oh, if only they're still alive inside him." Then she cut his belly open, and the 6 kids that had been swallowed whole by the gluttonous wolf jumped out and were unscathed. Immediately she ordered them to gather large and heavy stones and to bring them to her. Then she filled his stomach with them, and the kids sewed him up again and hid behind a hedge. When the wolf had finished sleeping, he felt his stomach was very heavy and said, "It's rumbling and tumbling in my belly. It's rumbling and tumbling in my belly, and I've only eaten 6 kids." He thought he had better have a drink of water to help himself. And he looked for a well, and when he leaned over, he couldn't stand straight because of the stones and fell into the water. When the 7 kids saw this, they came running and danced joyfully around the well. Story number 6. The Nightingale and the Blindworm. Once upon a time there lived a nightingale and a blindworm, each with one eye. For a long time they lived together peacefully and harmoniously in the house. However, one day the nightingale was invited to a wedding, and she said to the blindworm, "I've been invited to a wedding and don't want particularly to go with just one eye. Would you be so kind to lend me yours? I'll bring it back to you tomorrow." The blindworm gave her eye out of the kindness of her heart. But when the nightingale came home the following day, she liked having 2 eyes in her head and being able to see from both sides, so she refused to return that borrowed eye to the blindworm. Then the blindworm swore that she would avenge herself on the nightingale's children and the children of her children. "Well," replied the nightingale, "see if you can find me. I'll build my nest in the linden so high, so high, so high, you'll never be able to find it, no matter how hard you try. Ever since that time, all nightingales have 2 eyes, and all the blind worms none. But wherever the nightingales build her nest, a blind worm lives beneath it in the bushes and constantly tries to crawl up the tree, pierce the eggs of her enemy, and drink them up. Story number 7. The Stolen Pennies. One day a father was sitting at a table with his wife and children, and a good friend who was visiting him, and they were having their noonday meal. As they were sitting there, the clock struck 12, and the visitor saw the open door, and a pale child dressed in snow-white clothes entered. He didn't look around or say anything, but went silently into the next door. Shortly thereafter he returned, and went away just as quietly as he had entered. On the 2nd and 3rd day the child came again. Finally the visitor asked the father who the beautiful child was that entered the room every day at noon. The father answered that he knew nothing about him. He didn't even see anything. The next day the clock struck noon, and the child entered again, and the visitor pointed the child out to the father, but he didn't see the boy. Neither did the mother nor the other children. The visitor stood up and went to the door and opened it a little and looked inside. There he saw the pale child sitting on the floor, digging and rummaging in the cracks of the board. However, as soon as the child noticed the visitor, he disappeared. Now the visitor told the family what he had seen and gave an exact description of the boy. The mother was then able to recognize the child and said, "Alas, it is my own dear child who died 4 weeks ago." They then ripped up the boards of the floor and found 2 pennies that the boy had received from his mother at one time to give to a poor man. But the child had thought, "You can buy yourself a biscuit for that." Therefore he had kept the pennies and had hidden them in the cracks of the floor. This is why he hadn't been able to rest in his grave and had come back every day at noon to look for the pennies. So the parents gave the money to a poor man, and after that the little child was never seen again. Story number 8. The Hand with the Knife. There once was a girl who had 3 brothers, and the boys meant the world to her mother. Yet the little girl was always neglected, treated badly, and forced to go out early in the morning every day to dig up peat from the dry ground on the heath, which they used for making fires and cooking. To top it all off, she was given an old burned shovel to perform this nasty work. But the little girl had an admirer who was an elf and lived in a hill near her mother's house. Whenever she went by the hill, he would stretch out his hand from the rocky slope and offer her a knife that had miraculous powers and that could cut anything. She used the knife to cut the peat and would finish her work quickly. Then she would return home happily with the necessary load. And when she walked by the rocky slope, she would knock twice, and the hand would reach out and take back the knife. When the mother noticed how swiftly and easily she came back home with the peat, she told the girl's brother there must be someone helping her, otherwise it would be impossible for her to complete the work so fast. So the brothers crept after her and watched her receive the magic knife. They overtook her and forced her to give it to them. Then they returned to the rocky slope, knocked the way she had always done, and when the good elf stretched out his hand, they cut it off with his very own knife. The bloody arm drew back, and since the elf believed that this was his beloved that had betrayed him, he was never seen after that. Story number 9. The 12 Brothers. Once upon a time there was a king who had 12 children, all boys. However, he didn't want to have a daughter and said to his wife, "If you give birth to our 13th child and it is a girl, I shall have the 12 boys killed. However, if it's a boy, then they will remain alive and stay together." The queen thought of talking him out of this, but the king refused to hear anything about this topic. "If everything turns out like I said, they must die. I'd rather chop off their heads myself than let the girl be among them." The queen was sad about this because she loved her sons with all her heart and didn't know how she could save them. Finally, she went to the youngest, who was her favorite, and revealed to him what the king had said. "Dearest child," she said, "go into the forest with your 11 brothers. Stay there and don't come home. One of you should keep watch on a tree and look over here towards the tower. If I give birth to a little son, I will raise a white flag on top of the tower. However, if it is a little daughter, I will raise a red flag. If you see that it is red, then save yourselves. Flee into the wide world, and may the dear Lord protect you. I'll get up every night and pray that you won't freeze in the winter, and that you'll be able to warm yourself by a fire, and when it's hot in the summer, that you can find a cool forest to rest and sleep." After she gave her blessings to her son, they went out into the forest, where they frequently looked towards the tower. One of them had to sit on top of a high tree and constantly keep watch. Soon a flag was hoisted, but it wasn't a white one. It was a blood-red flag that foreshadowed their doom. As soon as the brothers caught sight of it, they all became angry and cried out, "Why should we lose our lives because of a girl?" Then they all swore to remain in the middle of the forest to keep on their guard. And if a maiden would appear, they would kill her without mercy. Soon after this, they searched for a cave where the forest was the darkest. And that's where they began to live. Early morning, 11 of the brothers went to hunt. One of them remained at home to cook and keep the house. Whenever they encountered the maiden, she was treated without mercy and lost her life. This is how they lived for many years. In the meantime, their little sister grew up and was the only child left at home. One day there was a large amount of washing to do, and among the clothes there were 12 shirts for boys. "Whose shirts are these?" the princess asked the washerwoman. "They're too small for my father." It was then that the washerwoman told her that she once had 12 brothers, but they had mysteriously gone away. Nobody knew where, because the king had wanted to kill them, and the 12 shirts belonged to the 12 brothers. The little sister was astonished that she had never heard of her 12 brothers, and during the afternoon, as the clothes were drying, she was sitting in the meadow, and she recalled the words of the washerwoman. After giving considerable thought to what she had heard, she stood up, took the 12 shirts, and went into the forest, where her brothers were living. The little sister made her way straight to the cave that served as her brother's dwelling. 11 of them were out hunting, and only one of them, who had to cook, was home. When she caught the sight of her maiden, he composed himself and drew his sword. "Kneel down. Your red blood will flow this very second." But the maiden pleaded, "Dear sir, let me live. I'll stay with you and serve you honestly. I'll cook and keep your house." She spoke these words to the youngest brother, and he took pity upon her because of her beauty and spared her life. Later, when his 11 brothers returned home, were astonished to find a maiden alive in their cave. He said to them, "Dear brothers, this girl came to our cave, and when I wanted to cut her to pieces, she pleaded for her life so much and said that she would serve us faithfully and keep house, that I spared her life." The others thought that this would be a great benefit to them, because now the 12 of them could go hunting together, and they were satisfied with this arrangement. Then the maiden showed them the 12 shirts and told them that she was their sister. Indeed, they were all very happy about this and were glad they hadn't killed her. Now the little sister took over all the household chores, and when the brothers went out hunting, she gathered wood and herbs, kept the fire going, made the beds nice and white and clean, and did everything with zeal and without getting tired. One day, when she finished all the work, she took a walk in the woods and came to a place where there were 12 large, beautiful white lilies. Since they pleased her so much, she plucked all 12 of them. No sooner did she do that than an old woman stood before her. "Oh, my daughter," she said, "why didn't you let the 12 budding flowers just stand there? They're your 12 brothers. Now they have been changed into ravens and lost forever." The little sister began to weep. "Isn't there any way I can save them?" "No, there isn't any way in the world except one that's so difficult that you won't be able to rescue them. You must spend the next 12 years without speaking. If you say a single word, Even if it is only an hour left, everything will be in vain. Your brothers will die that very moment. Well, the little sister responded by climbing up a tall tree in the forest, where she took her place. She wanted to sit there 12 years without saying a word to free her brothers. But it so happened that a king was out riding and hunting in the forest. As he rode by the tree, his dog stood still and barked. So the king stopped, looked up, and was very amazed by the princess's beauty. He called to her and asked her if she wanted to become his wife. However, she remained silent and only nodded a bit with her head. So the king himself dismounted, helped her down from the tree, and lifted her up before him onto his horse. Then he brought her home to his castle. Meanwhile, the princess did not utter one word, and the king thought she was mute. They would have lived happily with one another if it hadn't been for the king's mother, who began to slander the young queen in front of her son. She's a common beggar that you dug up from nowhere, and she's doing the most disgraceful thing behind your back. Since the young queen couldn't defend herself, the king was led astray and finally believed what his mother said. So he sentenced his wife to death. An enormous fire built in the courtyard where she was to be burned to death. Soon the queen was standing in the flames that grazed the fringes of her dress. 1 minute left before the 12 years of her silence would be completed. There was no noise in the air, and 12 ravens swooped down onto the courtyard. As soon as they touched ground, they became 12 handsome princes who instantly put out the fire and led their sister to safety. Then she spoke once again and told the king how everything had happened and how she had to save her 12 brothers. Indeed, they were all pleased that everything turned out so well. Now they had to decide what they should do with the evil mother-in-law. Well, they stuck her into a barrel full of boiling oil and poisonous snakes, and she died a ghastly death. Good night, my friends. May the dark side watch over you. Sleep tight and don't let the Jedi bite.